Probably one of the, a great example that Dad used to talk about of Jane's commitment over and above the call of duty was when one day he called the office from the hospital in an emergency needing a particular type of blood. So he was talking to his office nurse on the phone, and Jane, who happened to overhear the phone call, said in her usual abrupt manner, "Get off the phone so I can make some phone calls." Because she had the same donor list as Dad. So she was able to locate Byron Butterfield. She saved the day by locating Byron Butterfield down at his field up on their beautiful farm. And Byron saved a life when he donated the much needed blood. You can't see Byron here, but that was him up on top of his hay. The doctors made house calls in those days. Here's one of his patients actually took a picture of him on a house call. And he really wasn't part of the horse and buggy days. It's interesting to note that back in those days, he charged $3 for an office call, no, $2 for an office call, and $3 for a house call. He usually did his house calls in the evening as he was at the hospital all morning, did his office visits in the afternoon, and then he would be out in the evening during his doing house calls. While making a house call in the dead of winter up in the hills of Deering, it was icy, and he found that he wasn't able to make it up the hill. So he got out and he crawled up the hill on his hands and knees. And the family's little dog, Prince, who can be seen here, came down to meet him. So Dad tied the stethoscope around the little dog's collar and kind of helped support him up the hill. And he also knew that if he wasn't able to make it, the little dog would run home and the people at least know that he was out there and come out and help him. So soon after, the family moved back to Massachusetts, and they gave Dad the little dog, since he had already established a relationship with the dog because he frequently made house calls there. So Prince became the family's first family pet. Now Maddie Brzezowski told me that when she went into labor with Jean, it was late at night and she wasn't able to wake Johnny up. So she called Dad. Dad drove down to her house, picked Maddie up and drove her to the hospital where she delivered Jean the next morning. And Johnny had to stay home with the rest of the kids. But they're all dressed in white, so he did have them dressed nicely. Dad really loved his older patients, and he could often be heard saying to them, "Behave yourself." In fact, I think that's probably what he was saying to Grandpa Coy at this time. So, yeah, Grandpa John Coy was one of his patients that lived to be 104 years old. And Grandpa Coy, when he was in his mid-80s, took up painting, and he painted many beautiful primitive works, which actually I think probably became quite valuable. And he was actually Antrim's Grandma Moses, because this is one of his pictures that we bought for Dad for a special occasion, and it was hanging in our house in a very special place for many, many years. Oh, another story about an old woman that he was doing a house call on, and he was examining her, and the woman turned to her daughter and said, "Who is this man?" And she said, "It's the doctor." She said, "I thought he was getting rather familiar for the minister." So Dad, of course, was the school physician and was responsible for the general health of the community. So here he is with Barbara Hardwick conducting doing a polio clinic for the town of Antrim. And here's our own Sweeney family.
That was the first oral vaccine.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
all right. Yeah. Thank you. Now, Dad loved taking care of our own animals. He was an animal lover himself, so he used to do a lot of our own vet work. Here he is. He had just set the leg of my sister's Nancy's little dog, Heidi. Now, Heidi, she rescued her after actually seeing her being thrown out of a third-story window. So she took her home, and Dad set her broken leg and put a cast on it. He also delivered my horse, Shottish, on June 4th, 1973. That was actually his very last delivery. Now, Dr. Fritz was our vet, and our dad, in turn, was their family doctor. So Dr. Fritz knew that he was doing his own vetting. So he used to tell him, Doc, if you promise to stop practicing veterinary medicine on your animals, I will promise to stop practicing medicine on my kids. Even our dog Major had a role in the community. Major loved to patrol the town. He felt it was his duty to watch over the people. Now, Charlie and Virginia Wood owned the hardware store at the time. So Major he assigned himself the job of being Virginia Wood's bodyguard. He used to show up at that store every night about closing time, where he would escort Virginia home with all the day's earnings in exchange for a very special treat once he got there. Now, this is the days before the rescue squads. To some extent, the hearses were also used as an ambulance. But for those real emergencies out in the field, it was Dad and Dr. Rita Holt who were the ones to really care for the people down on the fields. You know, it wasn't, like I said, no rescue squad at the time. So our family station wagon was equipped with, it doubled as an ambulance, and it was equipped with an oxygen tank, his army stretcher, and of course his radio, and blankets, and of course his medical bag. And this is the insignia. We actually have this on the table at the back that he was required to put in the back of his car, so anybody, police or anything, if he stopped at a scene of an accident, would know that he was a doctor. He was there the night when the Gates factory burned, with his station wagon warming and ready to care for any injured firefighters. Now, fortunately, that night there were no injuries, but the battery of Dad's car ran down during that long, cold night. So before the firefighters could go home, they had to get Dad's car started again before they could really call it a night and go home. He was there, yeah. He was there the night that Hutchie crashed his car. And this is Jean Keating, who was an RN, who along with Carl Keogh helped Dad to care for Hutchie and get him to the hospital. Jean, of course my dad was known to be a very fast driver anyway, but Jean Keating said that she was never so terrified in her life as she was riding in the back of the car with Hutchie. And of course, that was the days before that nice straight 202, so that meant a very fast flight through the winding roads of Bennington and Hancock. But they got him safely to the hospital, and then he was transported from there to Boston, where he died 2 weeks later. Now, Dad was also very instrumental in getting the rescue squad up and going, and including doing their medical training. Now, we really never knew what he was doing these nights. He could have been going out playing poker for all we knew. He would just come home, eat a quick supper, and run out the door saying, "Got rescue squad tonight." And it really wasn't until after he died people came to us with stories about what he did to get the rescue squad started. And actually, this was their first ambulance, and here are some of the early members of the rescue squad. Now, at this point, I want to acknowledge somebody. Is Mike Beauchamp here?
No, it's not.
Oh, Patty was going to promise. I want to acknowledge Mike Beauchamp, who has been there since the first day the rescue squad was started, And what I understand, he's now just completing 50 years with the Antrim, Bennington, with the Antrim Fire and Rescue. So I want to. So we've come a long way since the family station wagon. That's actually the view that I get out my office window. I didn't take this picture. I got this one off the internet, but that's just about the view, and I never get tired of seeing that. Right, Kim? This is my office window. Now, in 1969, they realized that they needed a little more of an updated office, so they had the office on Elm Street built. And after a couple years, I think in 1974, they extended their practice to include a dentist. So in 1974, Skip Holmix moved here downstairs, opened his dentist office. And then a year later, they added an optometrist, and Dr. James Mancini moved in. Now, breaking news, this building, as of this summer, they're going to be renovating this building. It is going to be doubling in size, so stay tuned. Before we move on to the hospital, does anybody remember the lollipop box? And we actually have the lollipop box here with lollipops. So Raymond, I think you didn't get your last one, but with your rabies shots, you can get your last lollipop. So at the same time he came up and started his practice, he joined Monadnock Hospital. Now there's a couple of qualities about Dad that we want you to understand that had a major effect on his life at in the office and the hospital. And I think it kind of can be seen more in his practice at the hospital. I do have to read this part because I want to make sure I get across my point. Okay, the first one was that he was never afraid to say, I don't know. He was proud of his relationships with the specialists in Boston and often referred patients, either referred or consulted patients down to Boston. He was progressive and innovative and kept up with the latest research in both his practice and both his specialty and in the field. He made sure that both the office and the hospital had the latest top-of-the-line equipment. He also kept up with the rapidly changing world of medicine to know when it was time for him to turn over certain fields to the specialist while devoting his energies to keeping up with his own specialty, which was anesthesia. An example of this is obstetrics. As many of you know, he delivered a lot of babies over the years. The early 1970s were a time of rapidly changing advances in the field of both obstetrics and neonatal care. Dad recognized this as it was coming down the pike, and he said, OB is changing faster than I can possibly keep up with it. It's time to turn the field of obstetrics over to specialists. So he was the one that brought this to the attention of the hospital, and thus began the search for obstetricians. Now, Dr. Fred Richardson knew a couple of obstetricians. I think he knew them in the Navy that were looking for a place to practice. So the rest is history, of which Monadnock Hospital is very proud. Dad delivered his last baby, I think in the late winter, early spring of 1973. And then Dr. Bruce Brodkin and Dr. Chuck Siegel came over and came to town and started a very busy practice. Actually, as I stated before, Dad's last baby was actually my horse shot. It was in June of 1973. He became, that's what he always used to say, I always remember that. He became involved in administering anesthesia at the hospital. He joined the New Hampshire, New England, and American Societies of Anesthesiology. And in 1963, he took the exam and became the hospital's first board certified anesthesiologist through the American Society of Anesthesiologists. This is a mock-up that they did at the operating room in 1968. Here's Dad at the head, and Dr. Lee, and Dr. Twitchell, and Cynthia Turner. And about this time, actually, Dr. Wiederhold, who also delivered anesthesia, became certified in the American Academy of Family Practice. Dad developed the Department of Anesthesiology at the hospital, and he brought the concept of the post-anesthesia recovery room to the hospital as well, and he's actually set up the first recovery room. As part of his responsibilities as anesthesiologist, he was also responsible for respiratory therapy. So as the needs became greater, he established the respiratory therapy department at the hospital as a separate department under his auspices, and he hired the first full-time respiratory therapist at the Monadnock Hospital, David Goss. Now, his two closest associates at the hospital, other than Dr. Wiederhold, of course, were Dr. Ted Lee and Dr. Pete Twitchell. Fond memory he always had of Ted Lee was he used to quote Shakespeare during surgery. And Dr. Twitchell was the first surgeon in the Peterborough area to be certified by a national specialty board. And we do have his wife, Ann, here. This year, this is the hospital staff and the hospital around the mid-70s. I guess this picture actually said hospital staff, 1974. This is some of the nurses that worked there. This nurse here, Donna Proudfoot, was a top-notch ICU nurse. But Donna decided that she liked animals better than people, so she went to work for Dr. Tenny Fritz and Coons. Lucky people to have her. She was fabulous. Dad really enjoyed teaching as well. And he was involved in... Dad, did you see that? He was involved with a lot of teaching for the hospital staff. Here we can be seeing teaching some kind of a procedure or something. And here he's demonstrating the bird respirator on our own Pat Leonard, who was a OR nurse at the time. One of his most meaningful experiences of his career was upon the death of one of his patients from Hillsborough, Charlotte Roselle. When Charlotte died, she left $100,000 to the hospital in appreciation for the wonderful care that the staff had given her husband when he was in and dying. But she said she left the stipulation that it be used at Dad's discretion. So again, education being so important to him, he set up this endowment as a fund for continuing education. So this became known as the Roselle Memorial Fund for Continuing Education. Antrim also had a very active hospital aide, and they did a Christmas fair every year and raised money, usually for anything that Dad could use in his practice. And again, I need to read, I'm going to give you a full list of what they brought. I need to refer to my notes again, sorry. Okay, the hospital aide, over the years, supplied equipment amounting to several $1,000s. They gave an anesthesia machine, a defibrillator, a cardiac monitor, pulmonary testing machine, hypothermal blanket, a recovery bed, 6 oxygen valves and flow meters, an operating room table, electrodyne monitor with tape runoffs, 6 cribs for the nursery, and 3 cribs for pediatrics. Yeah. Okay, I thought it was insane. So this year marks 70 years of Chandler's at MCH, from January 1947 right up until now, 2017. Now, as we go a little bit into his personal life, we do need to back up a few years, back to the early 1950s. They built the house here up on Smith Road, where now Missy and Isaac Lombard live. He bought the land from Fred Proctor, and the land used to be owned previously by Governor Goodall. His best friend at the time, Roy Baker, designed the house. Now Roy was restoration architect who used to do restoration work on antique houses. And he restored the Wayside Inn down in Sudbury, Mass. After it burned on Christmas Eve of 1955. And he also started the restoration work down at Strawberry Bank when they first started that project. He actually finished the first two houses before he died in the early 60s. The house was built on an open area with fields, which gave Dad lots of room to play. So he created these beautiful flower gardens and vegetable gardens, which he maintained up until the day he died. I think he one time had Stanley Dutton come in and do something, didn't you, Stanley? Yeah. But here's my mom harvesting some of his flowers. And this was really fun to see when Nelson Moulton actually plowed up, with his handsome team of horses, plowed up the gardens for him. I want you to notice, too, the white shirt. Every picture you will see him in, he had a white dress shirt on. Even going down to the post office on his day off or a weekend, he put on his white shirt and tie to go down to the post office. Then he came home and put on his ratty old white shirt. It's just something that you will kind of notice in all the pictures, the white shirt. And Mom finally had her own state-of-the-art kitchen all to herself. No nasty smells. Dad was very involved in the community. Probably his biggest love was the Antrim Baptist Church. His most active years, and probably the years that probably had the biggest effect on us, were the years of Milton Ryder from 1962 to 1966. He and Milton had a very special relationship, and Milton had an impact on all of us. And in fact, we are still in touch with Milton, and this was like, 50 years ago? In their older years, Charlie and Cheryl Boucher were the ministers, as they still are. But I do want to thank Charlie and Cheryl for their support of them in their older years, and also for taking the time to notice what it was that Dad actually did for the church. And they actually honored Mom and Dad. It was after Dad died, but we always thank them for that. I don't know if they're here or not. I don't see them. But. Okay, now, my brother-in-law Paul is going to tell you about this part, because he along with Paul and Susan Ruth was the sponsors, for the Cambodian family.
I guess is that kind of a testimony to my father-in-law's care for the community and people. And he was very modest about everything that he did. But in early 1982, Dr. Kelly in Peterborough was involved with resettling Cambodian refugees. And I think a conversation with Dr. Chandler said, well, I think it might be nice if we hosted a family here in Antrim as well. We talked it up among the family, and I think it was probably a little bit at the Baptist church. And we had one organizing meeting, people who were interested in that, and we thought, okay, we'll get organized, and several months we'd let the Lutheran Refugee Resettlement Service know that we were ready. But we had one meeting, and then a couple of days later, he got a phone call saying, okay, your family is ready, they'll be here at the end of the week. And we were really totally unprepared, but the group that quickly formed and scrambled within that week, and as I recall, and I'm probably leaving some folks out, but it was Dr. Chandler, Reverend Hensley of the Antrim Baptist Church, Susan and I, Ruth and Rod Zwerner, Donna Estalis, Bev Tenney, Evelyn Perry, Thelma Nichols, Debbie Brown, and I'm sure others, quickly organized, and everybody had a specialty. Housing was arranged. The first place that Kong and her family lived on was on Concord Street in a green apartment building there. and finances, health, and work. And I guess this going through the family. This is a picture taken just after they arrived. So this is Kong, the mother. She was a widow. Her husband was killed during the Pol Pot genocide in Cambodia. This would be the youngest son, Chan. Ree, this was Grandma. This was Kun, the oldest daughter. Chai, one of her sons, and this was nephew Chooch, who was the son of her father's, her husband's brother. And so they lived for, I think it was only a matter of months in the house on Concord Street, and we arranged for them to get an apartment in the schoolhouse apartments, where they lived for a couple of years. Kong, as soon as he got here, within a couple of days, got a job working at the cemetery, doing grounds work there, and was there for many years. Eventually, I think she went up and worked at Sylvania for several years, and then went and worked at the Peterborough basket shops for many years. Eventually, Dr. Chandler arranged to purchase Fred Roberts' house on Concord Street for the family, and he bought it outright for them with always the intent that they would live there. And probably within a year or two, they actually bought the house from him, and so they lived on that house for several years while the kids went to school through the Antrim schools. All the kids graduated from Antrim schools, went to Conval and graduated. Kong eventually married and moved to Jaffrey. Several of the children still live in the area, in the Monadnock region. I'm not sure if Chan still lives in Antrim or the Peterborough area. Might be in Jaffrey. And the purpose was really to get them to become independent of us, and that's what happened. We're still in touch with the family. In later years, when they were on their own, they would come up to the Chandler house on Sunday afternoons, and the kids would play, ride around on the tractors. They always called him Pa. And when they had a major event or a major decision in their life, they would go and consult with Pa to make sure that he agreed with them, and they'd seek his guidance. And he always referred to them as part of his extended family. Kong was essentially one of his daughters, and he had a lot of love for them. And I think it's a proud moment in his in this town's history that they were able to help his family successfully establish themselves and lead successful American lives.
He was also the school physician for Nathaniel Hawthorne College, as well as for the camps up on Great Lake, Sachem and Birchmere. He was on the board of the Valley Bank. He was also on the board of the Strand Corporation in Peterborough from the day of its inception until it was sold. He was the one that thought up the name Strand. And he and Mom bought this weather vane of a goose, which is still up there in the cupola today. They bought it up in Maine. It was done by a Maine artist. Now, he didn't get a chance in his on the horse. He never had a chance himself to get involved in sports, but he encouraged us to get involved in sports. The sport that he got most involved in was the horseback riding, which of course he had to trace us around to all the horse shows. He became involved in the 4-H. He was on part of the organization of the Monadnock Pony Club, and the charter meeting for the Monadnock Pony Club was held at our house up on Main Street. Over the years, many horse shows were held in our field, both for 4-H and like the Pioneer Riding Club. And here's Dad and Ted Hardwick watching over the horse shows.
Priscilla? Yeah. I still have pictures of the Pioneer Riding Club somewhere in my stuff.
Oh, do you? Yeah,
Here's some tickets and stuff that I.
Oh, that'd be fun if you want, because we want to keep this project
We
going.
really appreciate that. That was neat.
Yeah. So the town gave back to him in the year 2000 when they made him, it was only a year before he died, and they made him the Grand Marshal of their, which was it? Their Millennium Celebration Parade. And he was very thrilled about that. And in spite of all he did, both at work and the community, he still had time for us. So I'm just going to let some of the next pictures kind of speak for themselves as we give just a little bit of glimpse into the family life of Antrim's own doctor. Encyclopedias, any question we had, just always go look it up. Again, the one shirt. The closest he could get to Mom and to camping was to buy a little camper trailer. So that was one time too many for her. He was at their 50th wedding anniversary. Teaching his granddaughter how to become a doctor. Reminding Nancy and Dan to wear their helmets. Harvesting his pears with my son Jeff. His Nana with the Rooses. Splitting wood with my son Jeff. This is probably one of our last family photographs together. And some of his interests, his garden, of course, spending time with Mom, whom we call City Hall. Loved to read, spend time over his little cottage in Maine. Loved to make things. He made this baptismal font, this is back in his younger years, for the Congregational Church in Jamaica Plain. He built this dollhouse for Callie and Becky. He built his own stereo way back in the 60s. When he was finished, he opened the windows of the house and blurted out the 1812th Overture over on the neighborhood. Loved to travel. Still retained that photographer's stance as he was taking pictures. So to sum it up, these are some of the little known facts that you may not have known about Dad that we have covered in this presentation. We actually had them in the little frame thing on the back table. This is the bench we have at the hospital for them. I don't know, can anybody read what's on it? Yeah. It's a phrase from the Physician's Prayer, which Milton Ryder gave him when Milton left Antrim. He gave him a nice calligraphed, whatever, framed copy of it. So we took a phrase out of that, feeling that really kind of summed up his life. It says, "Give to my hands the healing touch, the throb of pain to still."